Picture this. You're walking through the opulent corridors of the Sultan's palace in 1650. Your silk slippers silent against marble floors inlaid with precious stones. The walls shimmer with gold leaf and intricate calligraphy, while the scent of jasmine and rosewater drifts through latticed windows. You pass through gardens where fountains whisper secrets to blooming orange trees, where peacocks strut across manicured lawns that seem pulled from paradise itself. This is the Ottoman Harem, a world of unimaginable luxury that has captivated imaginations for centuries. But as you move deeper into these sacred chambers, something shifts in the air. The laughter you heard echoing from distant rooms carries an edge of desperation. The beautiful women draped in jewels and silk move with the careful precision of those who know that one wrong step could mean death. Behind the golden bars of the most luxurious prison ever conceived, you're about to discover that at the Ottoman Harem was an sensual paradise of Western fantasies, but a carefully orchestrated system of psychological torture, sexual slavery, and deadly competition that consumed the lives of thousands of women and children. Before diving into these hidden truths that history textbooks prefer to ignore, if you enjoy uncovering the dark realities behind historical myths, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. Please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these buried stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared desire to understand the brutal realities that shaped human history. What you're about to learn isn't just another tale of imperial excess. This is the story of how absolute power created a world where beauty became a death sentence, where motherhood meant entering a war zone, and where survival required abandoning every trace of humanity. The harem system didn't just imprison bodies, it systematically destroyed souls, turning victims into perpetrators and love into a weapon of mass destruction. Let's start with how these women arrived at the palace gates, because understanding their origins reveals the true scope of this horror. The Ottoman Empire's appetite for beautiful women was insatiable, and it fed this hunger through a network of human trafficking that stretched across 3 continents. Picture slave markets in Cairo, where dealers specialized in evaluating female merchandise, their practiced eyes assessing everything from skin tone to bone structure, with the clinical precision of livestock appraisers. The most prized acquisitions weren't purchased. They were gifts from provincial governors desperate to curry favor with the Sultan. These offerings represented the cream of conquered territories: Circassian princesses with alabaster skin, Georgian nobles with eyes like emeralds, Slavic peasant girls whose beauty had caught the wrong person's attention. Each woman represented someone's daughter, sister, or wife, torn from everything familiar and thrust into a world that would remake them according to the Sultan's desires. The journey to Constantinople was itself a form of breaking. Women travelled in covered wagons for weeks, chained together like precious cargo, their captors ensuring they arrived unmarked but thoroughly terrified. Those who attempted escape faced punishments designed to discourage others, beatings that left no visible scars but created psychological wounds that never healed. By the time the palace gates opened to receive them, many had already learned the first rule of harem survival: resistance meant death. Upon arrival, the new acquisitions faced what officials euphemistically called the selection process. This wasn't an evaluation, it was a cattle auction disguised as ceremony. Palace eunuchs, themselves victims of the system, who had learned to perpetuate its cruelties, examined each woman with methodical thoroughness. They checked teeth for soundness, felt muscles for proper development, and evaluated faces according to standards of beauty that had been refined over centuries of human were destined for the inner chambers, where they breeding. The most beautiful would compete for the Sultan's attention in a deadly game where winning meant temporary favor and losing meant permanent obscurity. The moderately attractive were assigned to serve the chosen ones, their lives dedicated to maintaining the beauty and comfort of those deemed worthier. The least fortunate were relegated to menial labour, their dreams of palace luxury replaced by the reality of endless scrubbing, cooking and cleaning for women who had once been just like them. But even this initial sorting was just the beginning of a transformation process designed to erase every trace of their original identities. Each woman received a new name, exotic appellations that reduced them to decorative objects. Gulnar meaning rose fire, Layla meaning night beauty, Yasmin meaning jasmine flower. Their birth names, the syllables their mothers had whispered in lullabies, were forbidden. Speaking them meant punishment. Remembering them became an act of rebellion. The clothes they had worn during their capture were burned in ceremonial fires, the smoke carrying away the last physical connections to their former lives. In their place came silk robes and jeweled slippers, gorgeous prison uniforms that marked them as property of the Ottoman state. Every thread they wore, every ornament that adorned their bodies, every morsel of food that passed their lips, belonged to the Sultan. They had become living dolls in the world's most elaborate dollhouse. The palace itself was designed to reinforce this psychological imprisonment. The harem occupied an entire section of the imperial complex, its boundaries marked by walls that rose like cliffs toward the sky. Within these walls existed a complete world: gardens and baths, kitchens and libraries, prayer rooms and entertainment halls. Everything needed to sustain life except the freedom to leave. The windows, when they existed at all, were covered with intricate wooden screens that allowed occupants to see out while ensuring no one could see in. This architectural isolation served a dual purpose. It prevented the women from communicating with the outside world, but more insidiously, it created a sense of unreality that made resistance seem pointless. Days blended into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years in an endless cycle of ritual and routine. Time moved differently in the harem, measured not by seasons, but by the Sultan's moods and desires. The daily schedule was rigid and unforgiving. Dawn brought calls to prayer, though for many women, these moments of supposed spiritual reflection became opportunities to contemplate escape plans they would never execute. Breakfast was served in communal halls where conversations carried undertones of competition and suspicion. Who had caught the Sultan's eye, who was falling from favor, who might be eliminated as a threat. Morning hours were dedicated to education, though the subjects taught revealed the harem's true purpose. Women learned music and dance, not for personal fulfillment, but to entertain their master. They studied languages, not to expand their minds, but to communicate more effectively with their captor. They practiced calligraphy and poetry, creating beautiful art that would be used to seduce and manipulate. Afternoons brought the rituals of beauty maintenance that consumed enormous portions of their lives. In elaborate bathhouses decorated with marble and gold, women spent hours preparing their bodies for inspection. They soaked in perfumed waters, scrubbed their skin with expensive soaps, and applied cosmetics with the precision of artists painting masterpieces. Every hair was plucked, every nail shaped, every inch of skin made smooth and fragrant. But these beauty rituals weren't acts of self-care, they were preparations for war. Because in the harem, beauty was the only weapon available, and every woman was locked in mortal combat with every other woman for the ultimate prize, the Sultan's favor and the chance to bear his heir. This competition wasn't genteel or civilized. It was vicious, calculating, and absolutely ruthless, with stakes that couldn't have been higher. The women who thrived in this environment learned to weaponize every aspect of their existence. A perfectly timed glance could destroy a rival's chances. A whispered rumor could end a life. A strategically placed piece of jewelry could catch the Sultan's attention and change destinies forever. They became experts in reading micro-expressions, detecting threats, and exploiting weaknesses with the skill of trained assassins. The most successful women in this deadly game weren't necessarily the most beautiful. They were the most ruthless. Consider Kösem Sultan, who entered the harem as a frightened Greek girl named Anastasia, but transformed herself into one of history's most powerful women through a combination of strategic seduction and calculated brutality. She understood that survival required becoming someone entirely different, someone who could smile while planning a rival's destruction, someone who could cradle a baby while plotting the murder of its mother. The hierarchy within the harem was as complex and rigid as any military structure, but infinitely more treacherous. At the bottom were the newest arrivals, terrified girls who hadn't yet learned the rules of this twisted game. They served the older women, cleaned their quarters, and prepared their meals while desperately trying to avoid drawing envious attention to themselves. Ability was their only protection, but invisibility also meant accepting a life of permanent servitude. Above them were the gözde, women who had caught the Sultan's eye but hadn't yet shared his bed. These women lived in constant tension, knowing that their moment of opportunity could arrive at any time, but also understanding that failure to please would mean immediate demotion to the ranks of servants. They practiced their arts obsessively, perfecting dance moves that might seduce, memorizing poetry that could enchant, learning massage techniques that would bring pleasure. The Iqbal occupied the next level, women who had successfully bedded the Sultan but hadn't conceived his child. Their position was precarious in the extreme, dependent entirely on maintaining the ruler's interest in a palace where new beauties arrived constantly. Many resorted to love potions and magic charms, desperate measures that revealed the psychological pressure they endured. Others turned to more direct methods, arranging accidents for competitors or spreading rumors about rivals' sexual inadequacies. At the apex of this hierarchy stood the Haseki and the Valid Sultan, women who had borne the Sultan's children and achieved a measure of security through motherhood. But even these positions came with their own unique terrors. Having a child meant everything and nothing simultaneously. It provided protection from casual disposal, but created new vulnerabilities as other mothers plotted against your offspring to advance their own. The education system within the harem was perhaps the most insidious aspect of the entire operation. Young girls who arrived as captives were gradually trained to become willing participants in their own oppression. The process was subtle and psychological, designed to break down resistance while building up dependency. Teachers weren't cruel taskmasters, but kindly older women who had themselves been through the same transformation years earlier. These instructors taught their students that resistance was futile and submission was wisdom. They shared stories of women who had tried to escape and met horrible fates, while celebrating those who had embraced their roles and achieved great heights within the system. They rewarded compliance with small privileges, better food, prettier clothes, more comfortable sleeping arrangements, while punishing defiance with isolation and deprivation. The curriculum included lessons in palace etiquette that were really exercises in dehumanization. Students learned to walk with their eyes downcast, to speak only when addressed, to anticipate needs before they were expressed. They practiced bowing to the proper depth, serving tea with the correct ceremony, and arranging flowers according to imperial preferences. Each lesson reinforced the message that their value lay entirely in their ability to please others. Language instruction revealed another layer of the psychological manipulation. Women were taught Ottoman Turkish and Arabic not to broaden their intellectual horizons, but to better understand their master's commands. They learned Persian poetry not for artistic appreciation, but to recite verses that would inflame desire. They studied music not for personal expression, but to accompany their own objectification with beautiful melodies. The most chilling aspect of this education was how effectively it worked. Within months, terrified captives began to compete eagerly for their instructor's approval. They internalized the values of the system that had enslaved them, measuring their worth by their ability to attract male attention and their success by their position in the harem hierarchy. They learned to see other women not as potential allies, but as threats to be eliminated. Religious instruction provided the final seal on their psychological imprisonment. Islamic scholars carefully selected verses and teachings that emphasized obedience, submission, and acceptance of divine will. They explained that the Sultan was God's representative on earth, making service to him a sacred duty. They taught that paradise awaited women who fulfilled their roles perfectly, while hell consumed those who rebelled against their divinely ordained positions. These religious lessons weren't delivered by harsh fundamentalists, but by gentle, motherly figures who spoke with apparent compassion about the spiritual benefits of surrendering personal desires for higher purposes. They held intimate discussion groups where women could express their fears and doubts, only to have these vulnerabilities redirected toward accepting their fates with greater serenity. The physical environment supported every aspect of this psychological conditioning. The harem was designed as a sensory paradise that made the outside world seem harsh and uninviting by comparison. Everywhere the women looked, they saw beauty, intricate tilework, flowing fountains, lush gardens filled with exotic flowers. The air carried the fragrance of expensive incense and rare perfumes. Their clothes were made from the finest silks, their meals prepared by master chefs using ingredients imported from across the empire. This luxury served a crucial function in maintaining control. Women who had grown accustomed to such refinement found it difficult to imagine life outside the palace walls. The harsh realities of the world beyond, poverty, disease, violence, uncertainty, seemed far worse than their current circumstances. The golden cage became preferable to freedom, when freedom meant abandoning everything that had come to define comfort and security. The bathing rituals that consumed so much of their time weren't just about cleanliness. They were elaborate ceremonies of transformation that reinforced their roles as objects of desire. In steam-filled chambers decorated with marble and precious stones, women spent hours preparing their bodies according to exacting standards. Every hair was removed, every inch of skin perfumed, every nail shaped to perfection. These bathing sessions became theatres of psychological warfare, where alliances formed and dissolved like soap bubbles. Women who had been friends moments earlier would suddenly turn cold when they noticed each other's bodies being prepared with particular care, understanding that someone had been selected for a special audience with the Sultan. The attendants who supervised these rituals were themselves former harem members who had aged out of desirability, their knowledge of palace politics making them invaluable as spies and informants. The most devastating aspect of the bathing ceremonies was how they transformed natural bodily functions into sources of shame and competition. Women learned to view their own flesh as merchandise that required constant maintenance and improvement. They developed obsessive relationships with their appearances, spending fortunes on cosmetics and treatments that promised to restore fading youth or enhance natural assets. The evening hours brought the most dangerous time in the harem's daily cycle, when the Sultan might issue summons for entertainment or companionship. These calls came without warning, delivered by eunuchs who appeared like silent phantoms in corridors and chambers. The chosen woman had minutes to prepare herself for an encounter that could elevate her status or destroy her completely, depending on her ability to satisfy imperial desires. Those not selected faced their own torments, lying awake through long nights wondering if their moment had passed forever, calculating how many days had elapsed since their last audience, measuring their declining prospects against the rising fortunes of younger, fresher rivals. Sleep became elusive when every sound might herald opportunity or disaster, when every shadow could conceal a messenger bearing news that would reshape destinies. The pregnancies that occasionally resulted from these encounters transformed the harem into something resembling a medieval battlefield, where expectant mothers became walking targets for rivals who understood that royal offspring represented the ultimate threat to their own ambitions. These women lived in constant fear, knowing that miscarriages could be induced through poisoned food, deliberate accidents, or carefully administered herbs that left no trace of foul play. The medical care provided to pregnant concubines revealed the empire's true priorities with crystalline clarity. Palace physicians attended these women not out of concern for their well-being, but to protect the potential heirs growing within their wombs. The mothers themselves were treated as mere vessels, important only for their ability to deliver healthy princes who might one day claim imperial power. Childbirth brought temporary relief from competition, but introduced new forms of terror as mothers realized their infants had become pawns in games far more deadly than any they had previously encountered. Royal children faced constant threats from relatives who viewed them as obstacles to their own offspring's advancement, creating an atmosphere where maternal love became a luxury too dangerous to indulge openly. The education of these imperial children began in infancy, with lessons designed to prepare them for lives of either absolute power or violent death, depending on the political currents that would shape their futures. Princes learned statecraft alongside swordsmanship, while princesses mastered the arts of manipulation that would serve them in marriages arranged to cement political alliances with foreign powers. The aging process brought its own unique horrors for harem residents who had built their identities around physical beauty and sexual desirability. Women who had once commanded attention and respect found themselves gradually relegated to servant roles, their opinions ignored, their presence barely acknowledged by newer arrivals, who saw them as cautionary tales rather than sources of wisdom. Some former favourites attempted to maintain relevance through political intrigue, using their knowledge of palace secrets to manipulate events from behind the scenes. These shadow players became puppet masters in elaborate schemes involving succession planning, military appointments, and diplomatic negotiations, their influence invisible but often decisive in shaping imperial policy. The most successful of these aging concubines evolved into power brokers who controlled access to information, resources, and opportunities within the harem hierarchy. They operated networks of informants and agents that rivaled those of professional intelligence services, their tentacles reaching into every corner of palace life and beyond, into the broader empire. The death of a sultan created chaos that revealed the true nature of relationships within the harem, as alliances crumbled and new coalitions formed around potential successors. These transition periods witnessed purges that eliminated perceived threats with surgical precision, as surviving power holders moved to consolidate control and eliminate rivals who might challenge the new order. The ascension of a new ruler meant wholesale changes in harem personnel, as the fresh sultan's preferences reshaped everything from architectural decorations to menu selections. Women who had thrived under the previous regime suddenly found themselves in more knowledge of imperial-told danger, their intimate secrets making them liabilities that required permanent silencing. These cyclical purges created an atmosphere of perpetual instability that prevented genuine relationships from forming between harem residents, who understood that today's closest friend might become tomorrow's executioner, depending on shifting political winds. Trust became impossible when survival required constant vigilance against betrayal from any direction. The walls of Topkapi Palace still stand today, transformed into a museum where tourists admire the architectural beauty and artistic treasures of Ottoman civilization. Visitors marvel at the intricate tilework, the golden calligraphy, the peaceful gardens where fountains still whisper their ancient secrets. But the guided tours speak only of imperial grandeur and cultural achievement. They remain silent about the systematic destruction of human souls that occurred within these very chambers. Behind every empire's magnificent facade lies a foundation built on human suffering, and the Ottoman Harem represents one of history's most sophisticated systems of psychological torture, disguised as luxury. The women who lived and died in these golden cages left no written records of their experiences, no testimonies of their pain, no monuments to their memory. Their stories were deliberately erased, their voices silenced by those who found their truth inconvenient. Yet their ghosts still walk these marble corridors, reminding us that the price of absolute power has always been paid by those who had no choice in the transaction. The beautiful mosaics still conceal the stains of innocent blood, and the ornate chambers still echo with the cries of women who discovered that paradise could become hell when it came with golden bars. These forgotten victims deserve more than our fascination with their exotic suffering. They deserve our recognition of their humanity and our understanding that the horrors they endured were not ancient aberrations, but part of an ongoing human tendency to rationalize the unthinkable when it serves powerful interests. Their story is a mirror reflecting truths we'd rather not acknowledge about ourselves and our world. But mirrors that show us ugly realities are often the most important ones to look into.